Welcome to the Kit Car History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marks of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff. A lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved, and what happened to them. Welcome to the Total Kit Car YouTube channel and another episode of the Total Kit Car History Files. My name's Steve Hole, editor of TKC Mag and TotalKitCar.com. And I offer you a warm welcome. Straight in this episode, we're going to look at the Warwick / Peerless mark, a company of the late 50s that had a fascinating history. There's often a lot of confusion between Warwick and Peerless and which one came first and how it all came together. So we'll try and straighten that out a little bit here, really. The reason the Peerless mark, or what became, let's call it the Peerless mark straight away, really. The reason that mark existed is down to a Warwickshire-based hotelier called James Burns, better known as Jimmy. He ran a well-known establishment, which still exists actually in Warwickshire, called the Saxon Mill. And it's still thriving as well to this day, actually. But anyway, back then, dear old Jimmy had a hankering for his own vehicle, and this desire was egged on all the time by the regular lunchtime appearances and after-work appearances of various standard Triumph directors who weren't too far away from that part of Warwickshire, which is just off the A46, by the way. And he'd always had and those people that would frequent that the Saxon Mill at lunchtimes include Lyndon Mills, Harry Webster, Martin Tustin and Alec Dick. And Burns was friends with a guy called Bernie Roger, who really was a talented man. And he'd already created or been involved with the Beat Roger race car with Norton expert Francis Beat, who was encouraged, and Bernie was encouraged to design a what-if type of scenario for Jimmy Burns, really. He came up with a stylish two-seater that, for want of a better name, was christened Warwick GT, which is kind of how that came about. They couldn't think of a name for it, and he just called it the Warwick because after the county of Warwickshire. I think it was as simple as that. And anyway, Saxon Mill is sort of on the outskirts of Warwick, the town of Warwick. So I think that fitted quite nicely, for want of a better name. It used what described as state-of-the-art 16-gauge multi-tube space frame and an aluminium body, using surprisingly Triumph Mechanicals, TR3 in this case. And in testing, the car was very successful. It exceeded expectations, in fact, and I think it even achieved 120 miles per hour on one occasion, which was good going for those days. Roger showed the prototype to his friend and ex-army colleague, as well as being a motorsport enthusiast, John Gordon, a well-respected Rolls-Royce dealer. And he indeed was later the Gordon of Gordon Keeble, so he had a bit of a pedigree as well. He also showed it to another friend called to Jim Keeble, Gordon Keeble. And apparently Keeble wouldn't suffer fools gladly. He wouldn't pull no punches. If anything he didn't like, he'd say. But he was regarded highly in those days for his ability to, because he wouldn't pull any punches, he would give good advice if harsh. And indeed, it was he who came up with the idea to make the vehicle a 2+2, which he felt would give it a more sophisticated feel, and also, of course, make it more practical. So Roger took the advice. He lengthened the chassis, widened the track, and added a Dion rear end, just in time for the car's debut at the 1957 Paris Motor Salon, where it was, by all accounts, again, incredibly well received. So encouraged were the people involved behind the car, Burns and Keeble and Roger, that they were encouraged to go and find a premises in which to build them. And indeed, Bernie Roger was tasked with that job. And he found, it wasn't particularly local, but he found a disused showroom facility on the Bath Road in Slough, in Berkshire. Recently vacated by a Jaguar dealership or Jaguar dealer called Peerless Motors. So you can see where we're going with this. And indeed, that name apparently, I think, had been kind of traditionally attached to that business. And so even though the subsequent companies over the years, including the Jaguar dealer, they just inherited the Peerless name, and it stuck. And I think initially it was a sales outlet way back in 1920 or something, where they sold decommissioned First World War military trucks, with the name coming from the fact that much of the stock originated from nothing more elaborate than the Peerless Lorry Company of Ohio in the US, indeed. So they had a premises. By default, they had a name for their new company. And so thus the Peerless GT was born. They'd switched, for production purposes, as many did in those days, they switched from aluminium to glass fibre. In that case, it was produced by a company called James Whitson & Co. Although I think I've mentioned in an earlier one of these videos that an organisation called British Resin Products, and I don't know if you may not well indeed have listen to these in chronological order, but in case you haven't, I mentioned in one of the videos that there was a company called British Resin Products who were right at the vanguard of GRP for specialist car use, and they were an organisation that had various members, and they would, depending on where a company was based or an individual was based, would make an introduction to a company that was fairly local to them. So it was with Whitson and Co. Like many, indeed, Williams and Pritchard, one of the top metal bashers of their day, had grasped the arrival of GRP. They didn't see it as a threat. If you can't beat them, join them. And they actually created a separate glass fibre division, and much as some other metal bashers did. And Whitson's apparently were a former coach builder that were better versed in English wheels and sandbags. And only recently before that had discovered the newfangled GRP material. And I think they were still very much learning back then. And frankly, they couldn't produce the Peerless bodies quickly enough to satisfy demand, which irritated the directors of Peerless, Jimmy Burns, John Gordon and Bernie Roger. Please don't call him Rogers, because that's not true and that's not right. A very ambitious entry at Le Mans in 1958, merely from a promotional point of view, piled on the orders that the Paris show had done earlier in 57. And I think what they didn't want really was the orders that they got, because they needed to get the car into production and be able to build it in a reasonable time frame. Of the two cars entered, I think one finished 16th, very credible finish, and first in its class. And then things took another positive step when Peerless managed to get Standard Triumph to agree to supply brand new TR3 components direct from the factory production line. I guess that might have been, got to be suspicious and think that was the offer of free lunches for a year or something, I guess, but that would be scurrilous to suggest that, and I'm sure that wasn't the case. But the fact that the Standard Triumph execs were almost had a season ticket in Saxon Mill leads you to believe that acquaintances counted for a lot. But I have heard it also written, I've seen it written, that Alec Dick was quoted as saying that Standard Triumph felt almost obliged to help, given that they'd been the catalyst that encouraged Burns to embark on the project in the first place. So it actually is quite a nice story. They found another premises in Slough, which came on board alongside the Bath Road facility. This one was in Farnham Road. And the thinking there was that Farnham Road would be the manufacturing site, leaving Bath Road as it was an old showroom, to handle sales and admin. They took a conscious decision early on that they wouldn't be making the car down to a price. They wanted a high quality GT car at a high quality price. But that didn't seem to deter people, which is strange because sometimes specials manufacturers of those days suffered because they were competing head on with the mainstream, and sometimes they were more expensive, or at least at best an equivalent price to mainstream rivals. And so it was, and that used to put people off, obviously. But in Peerless's case, it seemed to do anything but. It was kind of strange. In '58, I think, a TR3 cost £999, or from £999, which equates to £16,250, I think, in today's money, allowing for inflation. But with a Peerless GT, it was £990, but of course it attracted £500 purchase tax, which made it the equivalent of £24,000. So it was a hefty premium over TR3, but still people were placing orders. But what became apparent to all three directors, and particularly Bernie Roger, whose baby it really became, they just had to speed up production. The issues in delays along production was just not sustainable. So he contacted the company that were producing Lotus's GRP bodies back in then, the plastics division of Bristol Aircraft Company. But he found them to be too expensive. So instead, he went to Wincanton Transport and Engineering, who had truck depots in Hampshire and Somerset. And I think even today they're a very large haulier. I think you might see them dragging Co-op and Sainsbury's articulated trailers up and down the motorways, delivering to distribution depots for those two. And they also had a key. One of the keys there. They had a GRP operation and factory in Woking. I think the company was founded in 1925, so they were well established. I think today they still employ about 18,000 people, which is amazing. And in the 60s, they were a subsidiary of. You have to forgive me for overseas listeners. Unigate Dairies, and our Woking division was producing thousands of milk float bodies. Again, please Google that if you're unsure and you're not aware of the wonderful world of the milk float in the UK. But even though times have changed as far as milk the way the milk is delivered, Wincanton still have lots of milk tankers on our roads. They just shifted emphasis from doorstep to farm gate and retail. But going back to Peerless, and instead of the 4 bodies that Peerless were struggling to receive hitherto, Wincanton could make up to 25, which was a massive improvement. Just what was needed, and helped trim the growing waiting list. After around 250 Peerless GTs have been sold, Roger took the opportunity to create a revised version, which he called the Phase 2, Mark 2 in other words. And that had over 20 alterations and improvements. Biggest visual change was that the headlights were now semi-recessed with a proper grille, replacing the original's rudimentary open grille arrangement, or never grille, just an opening in the glass fibre with often a P emblem in the middle. The car also now gained fixed quarter lights for the front, for the doors, which stiffened them up quite a lot. And he also fitted check straps to the doors, stopping them from damaging or going back and damaging the bodies. But he retained the TR3 mechanicals and its 2-litre engine. And at that time, all seemed set fair for Peerless. But a new director arrived on the scene, and he's said to have put a few noses out of joint, with John Gordon almost instantly resigning his position. And once this got out, several of the company's key suppliers sadly lost confidence in the mark and withdrew the company's credit facilities, which obviously put an immense strain on cash flow. And very sadly, in 1960, after around 50 Phase 2s had found homes, the company went into receivership, which is tragic, really, because of the quality of the car and what they had undoubtedly already achieved. That was really the end of it. But the other directors retained their belief in the product. And Bernie Roger had further ideas to improve the product. So he took over the car, he bought the project and went back to the original name, the Warwick GT. So that's how we go full circle and we go back to Warwick. He'd moved to a more modest building workshop in Horton in Berkshire, trading under the Bernard Roger Developments Limited banner. He'd taken the opportunity to strengthen the GRP shell, or rather Wincanton had, because as time, as demand and knowledge grew, almost hand in hand, companies or laminators, as we now call them, had an understanding of how the material was to work. So Bernie Roger was off and running again. But it wasn't all plain sailing. The body shells were a big improvement. And he actually took them straight away from Wincanton and returned back to James Whitson and Sons. His reasoning being they were less expensive. They'd already produced quite a good number of the original Phase 1 bodies. And as he wasn't expecting to be as busy or as commercially minded, I suppose, than the original Peerless company, or the previous Peerless company, I think dear old Bernie viewed that as being a price worth paying. At the same time, he revised the dashboard. He also added options for Webasto sunroof, a Smith's radio, and even the luxurious inertia seatbelt. He also revised the space frame chassis, and it beat all its rivals. Actually by that time it was beating its rivals on price hands down. He'd got the pricing about right. I thought was kind of what people reckoned back in the day. And he was back to where Whitson's were in the first place, and that's 5 vehicles a week. So he was quietly confident. And things were going well. The way it went wrong, I think, was when John Gordon actually was working on his new car, which obviously became the Gordon Keeble, as we mentioned earlier. A Warwick customer and an American expat returned home to the States and organised a batch of, almost with John Gordon rather than Bernie say so, I think, 10 Buick 215cc V8, which, as we know, became the Rover V8 pretty soon after that. So 10 of them were delivered to Bernard Roger Developments. The Warwick 350 GT was the subsequent car that housed those engines, and that was in late 1961. Although somewhere along the line there was a massive fallout because 2 other senior managers, along with Bernie, departed his own company in late 1961, which that must have been something quite serious, and I suspect it had to have been something to do with that V8 or the arrangement or the deal surrounding same. And it was a real shame. The company was sadly wound up in early 1962, so it was obviously a disagreement that led to complete implosion. And it's such a shame because those cars had so much to offer, and they they still look really fresh to me. As I say, you see one today and it still looks very good. There was one at Goodwood in 2023 in September there, and that would look beautiful, been restored. absolutely holds its own with any other classic 60s GT car, as far as I could tell. It does hold itself, I think, just as elegantly as a Gordon Keeble or an Alvis, or even a Vanden Plas 4-litre R, the Austin Princess style, the Pininfarina style bodies, so beloved of banger racers these days. But I think that people even thought they could be mistaken. I think some people did think it was an Aston Martin just by the way it looked. And also, of course, they loved the tail fin, and I think they were a bit like a mullet haircut. They were fighting against or swimming against the tide over fins, but clearly they believed in them. I think they look quite sweet, actually. The owners club, there is an owners club, and I think you'll find it at peerless-gt.co.uk, and they do a great job. I think they can organise you a brand new body show if you have one in need. The specific mechanical parts that relate to the car, and also much of the TR3 stuff, which again it actually remains available. I think they can do a body show, but please don't ask them for a kit, because I think you'll be met with a very firm no, and I don't want to be chased down the road by upset Peerless folk. All I'm saying is I believe they can do a body show, but for more information, best speak to them, eh? But anyway, that concludes another episode. I really hope you've enjoyed this one as much as I enjoyed doing them. Please come along and join us again next time. You'll be more than welcome. And wherever you are in the world, whatever time of day, thanks for giving up a bit of your time today to come and listen to this episode. And I wish you well, and I look forward to welcoming you again next time. Incidentally, we do these videos in association with our friends at Enwin Motors. If you got a couple of minutes and you've already subscribed here, please head over to that channel and do the same thing there. Subscribe and like, please. Anyway, many thanks, and see you again very soon.
Hello and welcome to a brand new collaboration between Enwin's Motors YouTube channel and the TKC Magazine YouTube channel. Now, those of you familiar with the channels, and if you're watching this on Patreon, surely you are, will know that we've had a lot of success with our History File series, where we take the magazine's extensive photo archive and provide voiceover to explain the stories of some of the cars and the manufacturers and the people of the industry in the past that helped to make the industry we have today. Well, what we're doing on this series is a similar thing, using the video archive from both channels to create more extensive videos on various cars or types of cars. By combining the video archive from both channels, we can actually show a little bit more to our individual Patreon supporters than you would get from one of the channels individually. Moreover, after 12 months, this will then filter onto YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, there are another 11 episodes waiting for you on Patreon. So if you enjoyed it, then why not go to one of the Patreon pages for Enwin's Motors or TKC Magazine and catch up on the rest. Anyway, without further ado, here is this month's video.
you.